What's up, Restoration Nation? This is Pastor Steve Harris coming to you with another podcast. My podcast is called Your Turn, and I want to thank you so much for joining me. And I can't say she's a guest anymore. I just can't. I probably should just...
It's just getting old.
Yeah, it's getting old.
It's the wife.
It's the wife. It's the boss.
Hey guys, it's Rhea.
Yep, she's here again. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today as we talk about... I'm going to say the subject is about fairness.
Yeah. And
of course, we've been in quarantine here for a while, and it's been a couple months now, honey.
Yeah.
Easily, with the calendar.
It was like since March.
Feels like forever.
Yeah.
It's like forever, like, winter, just jail. But there's a lot going on right now in time, and one day when people look back on this podcast, they'll be like, yeah, I remember when. But the subject is about fairness because... there's a big divide that's going on right now, and there's the crew that says, hey, we cannot let the foot off the gas, and, we need to continue to quarantine and so forth. And then there's another crew that says, hey, let it all go because we got to get back out there. We got to return to normal. We're never going to totally get rid of this. And if we don't, the economy is going to tank. Okay, got it. And I'm sure there's people in between and everything else. Well, for churches... we're technically allowed to have what they call a drive-in service, which means people come up in your parking lot if you have a building, and the pastor gets outside and he preaches an old school, at the pulpit type of thing in public, and whether they hear it through an iPhone or whatever, or they just watch it online, whatever they choose, but they basically pull up their car, and that's how they have church. Now, we are not doing that right now, but here's where a lot of people are scratching their head, and us included in that. The beach in New Jersey has now been opened, and especially next weekend when it's Memorial Day weekend, there's going to be a lot of people down there. So far, it's been a mixed bag. Some people say that it's a madhouse, social distancing isn't happening, masks aren't happening, whatever. And then you get another crowd that says, yeah, it absolutely is happening, everybody's enjoying themselves and so forth. So you get this back and forth going on, right? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, when Memorial Day comes, it's going to be a real big deal. And especially as he's opening that up. But here's the thing. You can walk into a Home Depot, honey, a Walmart.
Right.
And, there's wall-to-wall people, but that's okay. But doing a church, and we have a whole other problem.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but, I'm not the one that's going to be screaming at the doorstep of the governor and so forth, but I know people that are. I know people that want to. And my thing, though, is that about fairness. And I sit there and think about it, and I think about how we're so, we have this imbalance that goes on in life. But I don't know if you saw that video I put up, honey, but in China, the communists, the police, go into these house churches and just pull people out, never to be heard from again. And they're trying to get rid of Chinese churches like all over the place. If you're not registered with the Communist Party government, you basically are having church illegally. And they watch and they see everything you're doing.
Well, that's been that way in China for quite a while.
But it's getting worse.
Where they have to hide it and be silent and sing songs without a volume in their voices and things like that, Yep. And we're so used to our freedoms here, but are we still having them? Are they slowly starting to fade away?
Well, with a stroke of a pen, they took them away. And that's what a lot of people are upset about because it's like, well, wait a minute. How can they do that? Well, executive order, signing away a paper saying that, we have emergency things. There's a lot of things and there's parts of the country that were hardly affected, and yet they were completely shut down too. So why was that when it wasn't really necessary? Now you have those countries, those states that are up and almost like, back up and running type of thing. And you got the Northeast over here, which got hit really hard. And it's like, okay, so you're okay now and we're not, because we have the New York population around here in North Jersey and so forth. Let's speak to the people, honey, about life.
Yeah.
There are times in life where things are not fair. I know that's a major shocker, right?
Yeah, right.
There are times where you and I have been persecuted. We've been, I want to say, quote unquote, left for dead, but not physically. But that we've gotten the short end of the stick. We've gotten blamed for things. We've been in situations that were not our fault, and yet we got blamed for it or whatever. And I look at this whole situation and I see a lot of imbalance and unfairness, and I don't see, any time in the very, very near future that the governor is going to let up. But churches are probably the last on his list. Now, the liquor stores are perfectly fine. And according to what he said, Governor Murphy, that is, he said basically that, they are essential because if people suddenly withdraw off of alcohol, they could die. So therefore, they're going to keep them open. So what about God? Think about that.
Where does he fit in, right? You're saying?
It's basically like saying God's not essential.
Right.
It's like, you could do the faith thing, but you could do that at home. You don't need to really. And people are going through it right now, and they need not social distancing. They need social gathering. Now, I understand. You might be listening to this going, well, wait a minute, Steve, you're putting people in harm's way. I get it. But it's perfectly fine to go into the Amish market with a mask and make sure that we are kind of, we're not being able to sit down and eat in a restaurant, but we can eat takeout.
And people are not social distancing in there.
No,
maybe in lines.
No,
that's
not.
it. But not walking around.
I hope nobody else hears that. But,
yeah.
But they're not doing it. They're not doing it at Home Depot. They're not doing it at Walmart. And the grocery stores are a mess because, people are just not acting nice. And I'm so glad that we got online ordering. But getting back to the point about fairness, in life, especially when you look at the Bible, was it fair that Christ went on the cross? Was it fair that he had to come down here and die for our sins when we're the ones that, continue to carry it on to this day? Was it fair that we are born into a world that's already cursed because of Adam and Eve?
Right.
The list goes on, right? But with God, he has an equal justice to everything. Somehow, some way, I believe his scales, his justice scales are balanced.
Yeah.
Now, we heard about Abba and Father the other day. That was kind of cool. About one part meaning,
Abba
more like justice.
is
and the
endearment.
Other part, endearment.
And Father is authority.
Right.
Our authority figure. Yeah.
So you see that there's a balance there. Even with a mother and a father like us, we have kids, and although they're older now, there's certain characteristics that I have that Anna Marie doesn't, and vice versa. And so when we're dealing with the children, we had to have a balance with that. And sometimes they got in trouble and it wasn't fair, but we thought it was the thing that we needed to do and correct them, and so be it. So, honey, what word of encouragement could you give our audience to talk about, people are out there shaking their fists saying it's unfair because my business has been shut down. It's deemed non-essential. Or I lost my job because our company got shut down. Or a school teacher that all of a sudden is out looking in. What can you offer for that?
Where we have been in the last 16 years of our life, I would say that
us,
you and I, and by the way, who's Anna Marie? Because you're calling me Rhea, but that's my nickname. So anyway, and I feel like bad. Anna Marie. No, that's my nickname. Rhea is my nickname. But anyway, prior to that time, my husband and I lived our lives not understanding, who our source was, who our hope was, for our lives. Like we didn't know that, we didn't get that. And, of course now what I've learned and seeing, how I could have ended up in life if God didn't take his reckless kind of love and come after the one, meaning me, who was recklessly living my life, I'd be so in a whole world of hurt right now, and so I'm going to point people to, open up the Word of God, open it up and go start in the Gospels, to start in.
But to bring it back to the balance thing, to the unfairness thing, what do you say to someone who they say, how can a loving God be just?
Yeah.
How can it be fair when life just seems to not be fair? I mean, all the disciples died. They were murdered.
Yeah, I mean, because like you said, he's a just God, and for whatever reason, he deems what he does. We can't always explain that. But I would just encourage you to look up, to look to God and believe that he's got this in the palm of his hands. You may not understand that. You may not walk with him. You may be like, yeah, but why is he allowing all this? And how could a loving God, and we hear that so much, honey, don't we? How could a loving God, allow all this suffering and allow us to feel so roped in fear? And the key is we just have to trust him. We have to believe that he is our loving Father, and he hasn't left us. He hasn't left us. He's right here with us. He's right here with us. But the key is we have to do our part that he created us to be able to do, and then he'll do the part that we cannot. I mean, I don't know any other way to explain it.
So what would you say to a Holocaust survivor who watched their family be taken from their home, put on a cattle car, in cold, in darkness, brought off a cattle car into a completely different land that they didn't recognize, in the dead of winter many times, and they were basically separated from their family, children and mothers? It was almost certain death.
Yeah.
And especially older people, elderly, it was certain death. And basically they were marched into a building that they didn't know what was going on. And before you know it, they were stripped of all their possessions, which the Nazis kept. They shaved their head. They gave them sometimes a quick shower. Sometimes they just went right to the gas chamber. And they were put in these ovens that you would, on a smaller scale, looked at people put pizzas in.
And then there's all kinds of other terrible, terrible things that happen to people, honey. But how do you explain the suffering?
Well,
do you have an answer for it?
Actually, I do.
Okay, well, what do you say?
Because of mankind's being under a sin, a curse, it's expected that there's going to be nonsense here.
There's going to be suffering, yeah.
There's going to be things that are going to get in the way. However, God can step into something and stop something. He can not stop it. Mm-hmm. But we got to look at what goes on beyond the grave.
Correct.
When Jesus died and he rose again, if he just died, the end of the story would have happened and it would have been it. The story would have died. It would have been like, okay, that was nice. And so was all these other gods and goddesses that had their ending and so forth. But that resurrection, that victory of being risen from the grave.
That's right.
Is where we hang our hat.
Sure is.
So even if we're wronged here, even if people do things to us, even if somehow, some way, we get the short end of the stick, we have to know that, as we studied the other night at our bonfire, a man reaps what he sows. And it says God will not be mocked. Which means if you think you're going to thumb your nose at God and get away with being unfair to people, guess again.
Right.
So, in conclusion,
it's a somber thought, honey.
It is.
But, there's suffering.
But the bottom line is there are people that have died of COVID-19. Now,
a lot.
Right. And there are families who never got a chance to properly mourn for their family members because of the restrictions of COVID-19.
Or lay them to rest properly, yeah.
Well, yeah. And so you don't get a do-over. You can postpone it to a later date, but you don't get a do-over. So, as Anna Marie said, Maria, the one that has the full control of it all is the one you need to put the trust in. And no matter what, no matter if it looks bad, looks unfair, why, God, why, we know that with him, he will ultimately balance it out one way or another. So as you're listening to this, and you look around and you see all these things and think, how, God? Just remember something. He's merciful, but he's also just. So I want to thank you very much for tuning in today. And on that note, this wraps up another edition of Your Turn. And honey, I want to thank you. I know that last one was kind of deep.
Yeah.
I threw you a curveball with, but these are the questions that people ask.
True.
And we don't have answers for it all, guys.
And you think about Christ suffered, honey. And so there's suffering here in this world, unfortunately.
But I just want to encourage everyone to share this podcast. If it's blessed you, give me a comment. Subscribe, please, and give a thumbs up. So, honey, on that note, I just want to thank you again for joining me.
Great being here, honey. Love you.
And she is no longer a guest, that's for sure.
Bye, guys.